if you recall, there was an early wave. Carlos, you may remember this. It was an early wave in the early '90s of the first sort of politically correct movements in various schools around the country, especially at Stanford and at NYU and in Harvard and Yale and Princeton.
And literature departments were the ones
right
on the cutting edge.
Yes, hello everybody. Welcome back to 21st Century Renaissance. My name is Dr. Michael Opiano, and I am rejoined by two of my recent guests. I'm very happy to have them back. Kale Zelden, Head of Humanities at Portsmouth Abbey in Rhode Island, and Dr. Carlos Eire, Professor T. Lawrason Riggs, Professor of Religious Studies and History at Yale University. I'm very excited to have them back with us today. They've graciously agreed to join me as we talk about some of the problems in humanities education at large, from a bit of a Catholic perspective, but from a general perspective as well. What can we do amid this particular moment we find ourselves in, when it seems as though not only have the humanities lost their marketability, perhaps as certainly Yale likes to worry about in recent years, whether humanities degrees can be marketable, but whether they've also perhaps lost their meaning in the sorts of ways that they direct their attention. So I'll go ahead and pose this question to both of you. Right? I mean, you have. Each of you, together, I want to say you've got over or close to 60 years of teaching experience. So, I mean, this is a wonderful opportunity for me to have the two of you right in this room. You've been in the trenches for a lot of years, living the good life, living the dream, as it were, at least as far as I'm concerned. Let's maybe start from a place of experience. People make. It seems as though there's an issue, and you go out on Twitter, we hear people talking about, right, the crisis of education, crises of meaning, crises of the humanities. In your storied careers, have you noticed changes? Is this just a bunch of hubbub, or what does it look like from the inside?
Well, for me, it's not as the the wider crisis is not as clearly visible to me because of the institution at which I teach, which is rare, in that up until the 2008 market crash, history was the number one major. And that's very, very rare. Now we're number three. Number one is economics, and number two is political science. But we still have 300 majors. 200 history majors. Religious studies has never had very many majors here at Yale. As a matter of fact, when I became chair of religious studies in 1999, I can boast of this statistic. We lost 33% of our majors in one afternoon because he had to take a medical leave. We only had 3.
Dangerous day.
So, but oddly enough, Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, he has a son at Yale. He's a religious studies major.
All right.
So, but the crisis I see in the humanities is not just the shrinking of job openings at the secondary education level. And I mean by that secondary, like high school level, and also definitely college level. Everything is being tilted towards more practical subjects.
And you heard that, and you heard that kind of cry in the wake of the the '08 crisis that you were talking about, Carlos.
Yes.
Who can recommend to these children that they should, major in the humanities in the wake of this destruction, right? In the wake of this, and there didn't seem to be any kind of amplified voices that were saying, I think, something that both of us would have said, well, this is precisely the time in which you have to double down on the humanities and make sense out of things, because the practical undergirdings of the order are falling apart.
Yes, and especially because you have to add the ideological component to what has happened in the last 2 decades, but especially in the past 10 years.
Yeah,
which is the identity-focused ideology has taken over the humanities, and the creation of very specific ethnic studies, or the imposition of what I call the unholy trinity of race, class, and gender to all humanities disciplines, as if that is the only kind of approach that one should be taking to the past and the present, is that it's all about identities. And that kind of squeezes out much of the Western tradition, Western intellectual tradition, as well as the religious traditions.
I mean, you might almost say that was by design, right, to squeeze those things out, right? I mean, there's an ideological offense. It's an offensive move, isn't it, there? My question to you about that, Carlos, if you don't mind, Michael,
please.
Why is it that the route, and from my perspective, I teach high school, so I'm sort of on the front end of things, and you're dealing with the back end and the graduate end. I mean, why was the route able to occur with almost no pushback?
Right. I would say no pushback whatsoever.
Right. I'm being nice.
Yeah. Until fairly recently, people are harumphing that they're not doing anything about stemming this tide, which keeps coming in stronger and stronger and stronger. I think it happened because of cultural norms in North America, and it became unstoppable because it's kind of a market-driven change. What kind of courses do students register for? Where are the highest enrollments? Oh, well, let's do this kind of studies, whatever it is. In the time that I've been here, Yale created a new major in migration and ethnic studies. It's a popular major.
Well, can I ask, why is it popular, Carlos?
I think because it's pretty much on the minds of the students who come here, and here enrollments are driven by interest, student interest. You can have a class with 3 students, and here you don't lose by having low enrollments. You don't lose prestige or your position or anything unless you're untenured. Then they actually do count how many students you're attracting. But a lot of funding comes from enrollments. So is the administration going to give Department X more slots? Or let's say Professor Y retires from Department X. Is the administration going to replace him in the subject that he or she taught? And if the enrollments don't warrant it, that person will not be replaced, and that slot will go elsewhere where there are enrollments. So
can I ask potentially what degree of funding comes from like course enrollments? I'm interested, now that you mentioned this, on how does that structure actually work?
Well, there's a pot, right? The endowment and the budget for the university as a whole. And there are so many deans and associate provosts now. I've lost count, right? They're the ones making decisions as to how to dole out slices of that pie or that pot, right? And it's not like they have formula, so many slots per student enrolled in courses. It's kind of a ballpark estimate that they make. But if a department is teaching courses that hardly anyone enrolls in, they're not going to create positions for that department. And for instance, one I can think of, which has always been one of our smallest departments, German.
Sure.
At least since I've been here.
Yeah.
Very few faculty in the German department because students don't take German anymore. So what about German literature? Well, forget it. Without German, how are you going to have majors in German literature? Another such department is Near Eastern Languages and Cultures. We have one of the largest collections of Babylonian clay tablets. But Yale students are not lining up to learn Akkadian and cuneiform to read the tablets. So, but the history department is a good example. We, at one point up to 2008, we had 300 majors. It was the largest major in the university. So, boy, the history department, we have something like 60 some faculty.
Yeah.
Because we've kept our enrollments up. And you can kind of pair up the number of faculty to the total gross number of students taking courses in departments.
So would you say there's sort of a shift in university spirit? I'm not sure what else to call this, of like sort of a mission or a purpose of what those who are at the reins of making decisions think that the university is for. Was that something that had a major change after 2008? Did they pivot in terms of,
Well, what happened in 2008, is primarily financially driven. Yale lost a huge chunk of its endowment. It was still incredibly wealthy, but it was taken as a serious loss. I forget what percentage we lost of the endowment. And then they started focusing on how to spend less because the pot had shrunk. How to spend less. So hiring was frozen for a while.
Even at Yale. Wow.
Even at Yale, and people were retiring and the positions were not being filled. And then administrative, low-level administrative clerical positions started being combined, so that whereas a person before was the office person, what are they called now? They're called administrative or administrative assistants. Would have only been assigned to one department. Now we've got people who are doing 3 departments.
Right.
Whereas before Michael, Renaissance Studies.
Yes.
At Yale, Janice Zosher, who was handling all. She was in 2 or 3 other departments too.
That's right.
Studies was only one of her assignments. So downsizing at both levels, clerical, minor administration, and then faculty. We also had a situation I was able to observe during COVID. The largest number ever of Yale faculty retired. So 75 faculty retired. And then came the scrambling for slots. Which one of those are going to be replaced?
Yeah.
Which new ones can we create and insert into the curriculum. And of course, no, it's very difficult for any faculty member to get a bird's eye view of what's going on. We only see what's happening in our department or departments. We can't see what's happening to the university as a whole, at least not without great effort, and spend a lot of time trying to dig up the information. So it's hard to say, but some departments, I'm thinking of Italian. We lost our Dante scholar.
That's right.
Giuseppe
just
Mazzola.
recently.
And that was 5 years ago or so.
So you currently don't have a Dante scholar on?
Just hired one.
Okay.
Just now. It took 5 years.
Wow.
And in the history department, as Michael well knows, we had one of the largest collections of early modern historians in North America. 3 of them left simultaneously.
That's right.
One retired, one went to Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, and the other went to University of Chicago.
Yes.
We have yet to replace them.
They still haven't been replaced.
Nope.
Wasn't there an early modern search? Like, did they just not hire somebody during the last search?
There were 138 applicants for a junior position.
Yeah.
And the search committee was composed in what I thought was a very odd way. The specialties of the members of the committee. They decided to overlook one candidate who had already published 12 articles.
Okay.
And 2 books. Before earning his PhD, they found him unsuitable. He dealt with religion.
Interesting.
And instead, since 2 members of the search committee were economic historians, the job offer went to an economic historian who did transatlantic economic history. But she turned us down. And there was no number 2.
They didn't have a backup plan?
No. They found the fellow with all the books and articles unacceptable.
Just under no circumstances.
Under no circumstances, no. It was
that's wild.
Yeah.
So really was the heart of that, was it stated? The heart of that was that this was a person who was devoted to the study of religion?
Not explicitly.
Okay.
But his dissertation was on the early modern creation of solitary confinement.
Okay.
And traced it to monasticism. And they thought it was too fluffy, his dissertation. And that he obviously had no, as one of the committee members described him as a magpie who just goes picking a little bit here, a little bit there. But no, there was no number 2. So now the search will be carried out again this year.
So I've got a meta question then, sort of figuring in this, because this all strikes me again as the non-PhD, non-professional guy as pill pool, right? Like it's precisely the kinds of things that people who are not academics make fun of academics
That's
for,
right?
And to me, I want to ask you, Carlos, and you too, Mike, like, how do you tie this to this sort of humanities crisis that we're talking about? People are talking about it as like the meta crisis or the meaning crisis. I mean, is this little story that you've just now walked us through, Carlos, is it implicative? Does it mean something in the sort of the large way we conceive of this problem?
Yes, that this has always been true in academics. That you can actually get sometimes by accident, but sometimes by design, a particular emphasis in an academic department. So you say, let's get more economic historians, let's say. We need more economic historians. And then it's planned that way, and it happens. Sometimes it's just by accident that, right now, I think at the meta level,
mm-hmm.
what we're seeing is that, some subjects are more important than others. That has always been the case, but now those subjects that are deemed the most important are all laden with this ideological baggage, identity studies, and what's elites and subalterns.
Yeah.
Right. Social. What would you call it? I think you could call it abusive relationships.
Yeah.
Exploitative relationships.
So in other words, power.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it.
Litanies of oppression.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's what happens. And then this is how the jobs are crafted, the job openings. When you advertise for a job, how it's crafted is it's very deliberate. We want somebody who does this, and this.
So who runs that spirit? To use Michael's language, what always strikes again me as the outsider here, I haven't been in graduate school since the 90s, right? So, and in English, so not, so it's a whole different. Actually, it's not a whole different ball of wax. It's actually eerily familiar to me. But I mean, who runs point on? We're essentially talking about a religious test of some sort. It seems to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that you have to express some kind of credo, you have to sort of salute to the spirit, the prevailing spirit that says I'm down with the cause, and absent that salute or absent that bending of the knee, you're not gonna play. That person that you mentioned who's extremely qualified, and for everybody else, 12 articles and 2 books, you're qualified, right? You are not a magpie. You are not a magpie, picker here and there. That's absurd. That's clearly a kind of a lie. It's a ruse and a lie.
No,
right?
it was a lie.
Yeah.
And I've been seeing it ever since I went behind the curtain. The scene in The Wizard of Oz when
yes. Yeah.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Well, I got tenure, and I sat through my first tenure case,
mm-hmm.
and it was a colleague who was a good friend of mine, and I saw how a group of my colleagues in the religious studies department at Virginia piled up on this guy and found all sorts of ways of interpreting the letters written for him, the letters.
Yes.
Right, and it was the hermeneutic of suspicion. If I've ever seen one, it was every letter was twisted into some kind of negative meaning. So this has been happening, but now there's this added ideological component, which I think you're right in calling a credo or religion, in the sense that you do have to agree to do this. And Michael, you might have heard this from me, because it's the advice I still give to all job applicants. If they ask you to teach anything, say, yes, I would love to. It's always been my life ambition to teach this subject.
Yeah. That's actually something. It's not untrue, but it's off of some recent conversations, it's motivated some of my upcoming plans to get much better at my spoken ancient Greek. So fingers crossed over the next couple of years on that. But
but if they say, can you teach women's studies?
I would love to.
Say yes.
Yeah.
I don't know who would ask me. I don't know who would ask me to do that, but
well,
you know,
whatever.
I'd love to do it. I think it'd be amazing. I'd love to do it.
Yeah.
It would be a really lot of fun. I'd love it.
Yeah. Just say yes. And there's an invisible hand at work. And it's hard to see. It's not an individual hand. It's actually a cloud. It's like a cloud full of hands that direct things in a certain direction. But there's a kind of a common agreement. Oh, yeah, let's go for economic history, which is also a good way to get into the race, class, gender, and power issues. Economic history is great for that.
Yeah.
And I still remember my now retired colleague, Keith Wrightson, who was very, he's British. And he saw the way that his students were being sort of edged out of job openings because their focus was strictly on the British Isles, not on the British Empire.
Yes.
Right. And he saw that coming, and he saw it getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And one day he said something I thought was beautiful. He says, yes. Now, if you want to do early modern Britain, you can only focus on the bad things that English did to other people rather than to each other.
Right.
And that sort of captures the truth of what is going on.
Yeah, I noticed. I think it's also astute that you've been able to point to this as a sort of a religious or a semi-religious sort of element, Kale. I would say, right, I mean, I was kind of blindsided by this when I got into graduate work. I mean, without being too specific, I would say that, and this is sort of the, I would consider this tragic, right? I look back on my whole education as a graduate student, and I would say, with the exception of a single class, there was none of that. There was no race, there was no oppression, there was no power dynamics, there was no exploiting whatnot, right? In Barbara Shaler's class, she was very recently retired, right? Teaching paleography. Paleography was about paleography, right? Carlos, your classes were about reading primary texts from the period and asking pertinent contextual questions, right? There were not, it was not, well, but how can we fit this into the race, class, gender box? And that was true. That was true with all of the courses that I took in classics, even the classics courses I took, right? I know classics now, there's a bit of a push in that direction, but that's not what I experienced, right? With the exception of a single course, which was a methodologies course, which was the intro course to, hey, here's what it means to be a historian. Now you might think, a methods and methodologies course, you're going to be a graduate student. It's the reason why you're here, right? The culmination of you getting a PhD is producing this dissertation, right? This book length, exhaustive thing that somehow makes you an expert in a topic. So you would think perhaps maybe before embarking on this 6-7 year journey to write one of these, maybe they'd have you read some, maybe they'd have you write excerpts from some workshops. What do you want to do? What about leading up to this? Well, the first quarter, let's talk about, you guys know how to do courses. We don't need to tell you how to do coursework, but maybe here's how to handle, what does it mean to do research in an archive? What does it mean, to what are best practices to take that and then work that into a dissertation? What's really the purpose of this? Do you have a good reason for doing a dissertation? It's going to be a lot of your life. You should find a good reason why you're doing this, and it maybe just not, well, I think it's cool. But no, actually, we didn't read a single dissertation in that entire seminar.
What did you do? Just since I wasn't there, what did you do instead?
Well, we had some books that were assigned, and I would say the first part was good. It made sense when we looked at some classics like The Cheese and the Worms, thinking about microhistory. or thinking about oral history. The Holy Greyhound by Klaus Schmidt was a good read. But then as we got into kind of modern history, it started to make less and less sense to me. And there were enough people who were kind of like Foucault enthusiasts that within 15 minutes, once Michel Foucault's name was mentioned, I was lost. Right? We were now talking about social theory. We are now getting into this kind of social science thing that I wasn't exactly sure what was going on. I felt lost, and so I was like, I don't really know what to do here. I've never been a part of a discussion like this, so I guess I'll just kind of hang back. I understand what's going on in the other classes, but I'm a little lost.
Yeah, well, it was most of those professors you took courses with were among the 75 that retired.
Yes, unfortunately.
So things are different now.
Yeah, so I just to jump in here, I experienced that class that you're talking about. I experienced all of this in the mid 90s in an English department. And so when I showed up, so I came out of a kind of an undergraduate experience, it was very, in retrospect, it certainly would have been considered hyper reactionary by any other, English department in mainstream English department. But we read the great books, right? We read a bunch of stuff in English. We also read a bunch of stuff in translation, right? So it was like a great books, type thing. And I knew going into graduate school that I was going, and I'm basically conservative. And so I knew going in that, I knew what I was walking into. I knew that it was going to be, kind of crazy because I kind of kept my, if you recall, there was an early wave, Carlos, you may remember this. It was an early wave in the early 90s of the first sort of politically correct movements in various schools around the country, especially at Stanford and at NYU and Harvard and Yale and Princeton.
And literature departments were the ones
right
on the cutting edge.
That's right. So you had Paul de Man and of course all the Derridians and then Foucault but then you had all of the the post structuralists and the sort of Marxist feminists, and so that was all the rage in the early 90s. And so when I walked into an English department, I knew that I was already the weirdo. So I walked in knowing that. But that was fine. Like I'm a comfortable person. I looked at it as an opportunity to sort of sharpen my own saw. So I went in and I'm just listening. I'm going to sort of take it all in, and I would push back because the irony, of course, is that I was not a Marxist, and all of the self sort of identifying and practicing Marxist literary critics in classes, none of them knew Marx at all, which was, I thought, very funny. But fine, and so they had sort of developed the sort of the affect of it without really kind of sort of wrestling with the thing itself. But I just knew going in that I was sort of in this sort of double consciousness mode. Right, that I knew sort of what it was, and the only thing that they cared is that you could none of the students could ever admit to loving the thing, right? You could never say, I love Henry James. I just love Henry James novels. I like the original ones. I like the New York editions. I just love Henry. No, you had to have this kind of distanced affect of it's the crypto homosexuality of all these sorts of games, right? That again, hermeneutics of suspicion, as you sort of brought up earlier, Carlos. So what's interesting to me is that all of this was all the rage in the 90s and into the 2000s. I'm just really kind of surprised that it didn't hit a place like the Yale history department until later.
Well, yeah, I think. Demographics of the faculty here had something to do with it.
Okay.
The fact that we had, a heavy number of professors of a certain age who didn't retire till 2008.
Yeah, that's.
Until 2020 actually. COVID.
Yeah.
I always described it as like the bulge in a python that has just eaten.
Yes.
A lamb or something, and you just see it passing through. then boom, it's out the other end, and then I began to see it though in the literature departments before COVID, where there were openings advertised in such a way that the whole post-colonial thing.
Oh,
was the rage.
Carlos, look, I'll just be very blunt with the two of you. There's one reason alone I don't have a doctor in front of my name. It's because I was in an English department. I was funded. I was going to do the whole thing. I elected to take a terminal MA because after a 4 or 5 year departmental hiring freeze, in my first year as a graduate student, the department was able to hire an Americanist for the first time in X amount of time. So I had a front row seat to what it was going to be like to go through a hiring process.
Yeah.
I very quickly deduced that I had a snowball's chance in hell of getting, even if I could get through the first level of a hiring committee, I could not do this 2-3 day interview process and make it, because I had early on made a kind of personal swear that I wasn't going to lie to get a job. And so therefore there was zero chance. That's really
do
it. And look, maybe I sold myself short. Maybe I should have hung in there and fought the fight. But it was just very clear to me. And they had also I should also add that the other thing that I was able to see in my very first term in graduate school was they gave everybody who was entering the department that year. This would have been the fall of 1995. They gave everybody, as part of our packet, right, this disclaimer on the front of all of our materials. And, we cannot guarantee, employment, upon completion of your. So like that was sort of direct right in front. That was what was stated. So, those things, I guess, do have an effect on one,
Yeah, they do. They do. And well, I guess you were more perceptive than most about the question of fit. Your fit with this tsunami.
Yeah.
Because it did feel to me, even though I wasn't affected the same way, it did feel to me like a tsunami that just kept coming in. I sort of obsessively watched videos of the 2011 tsunami in Japan. Precisely because I saw a correlation between the images of this creeping vast amount of water to what had been happening in my profession.
It
feels like a tsunami, and post-colonial whatever. I laugh and cry at the same time, because I gave my daughter this advice when she went off to college. I said, please don't take any course with post-colonial in the title.
That's right.
She ended up basically having no choice because of the course offerings. She ended up taking a post-colonial course. She was miserable, and actually she would have graduated with a 4.0 were it not for that class. That's the
dark mark on her. Otherwise,
because she didn't play the game. In class.
And it was so clear, Carl. It was so clear. Sorry, Michael. That you had to play the game. I mean, that was always so. In retrospect, it's so ironic. As an undergrad, I had some courses taught by conservatives, right? Those nasty things. A conservative, and there was no more sort of freedom in a classroom experience that I had was when I had a so-called stodgy conservative. Yet in my gender narrative and property class, that was the one, talk about orthodoxy. I mean, talk about, litmus tests,
Yes.
Oh, man.
Kale, I was going to ask, right? So, I mean, you noticed this wave in graduate school of the onset of this complex of, various categories of valid study, the sort of new orthodoxy, the religion of that has no name sort of a thing, or many names or something like that, whatever this phenomenon is. You noticed this become popular in the 90s, and you saw it in the context of literature departments at the university level. Is this something that you saw then as a result of its popularity in literature? Well, in this particular English literature department, and in literature departments sort of ahead of time that you're aware of. I mean, did you see this start to take an effect at any point
Sure.
in your career during, like, at the high school level? Is this something that started to creep in kind of inexplicably, or was high school sort of insulated from this?
Yeah.
To a degree?
Yeah. I mean, look, I teach where I teach because it was a school that was dedicated to not caring about trends and was focused on, the fundamentals, the foundations, that kind of thing. I mean, that's why I teach where I teach. But to your question, did I sense? I mean, I think that, look, back in the day, Carlos, when you were going through your undergraduate experience, serious people majored in history and English and classics.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that was like, when you were a serious, like, you went to college, that's what you read. And that was considered, and again, I know this is going to make me sound sort of, retro here, but it was like kind of considered manly. There was this sort of, you were being a serious person by reading serious things. And there was a kind of sense of responsibility to this, what we might call a deposit of distilled wisdom over the ages, right? And I think that what you saw, what English departments were certainly seeing when I was in graduate school in the 90s, and it got bad really quickly, is that all of a sudden people just stopped majoring in English. I mean, and I think that, my interpretation of it, and Carlos, you might have a better read on it than me, but my interpretation of that is like, right, yeah, people stopped majoring in English because they didn't see it as serious. They saw it as sort of the refuge for the malcontents. Not that those guys who majored in English in the 50s and 60s and 70s weren't malcontents, but it wasn't considered meaningful in any kind of way. It was a waste of time.
I was in college from 1969 to 1973. So Gotcha. We're talking 50 some years ago.
That's right.
And I guess my education was somewhat unusual because I went to a Jesuit university.
Yeah.
And at that time, I would say that close to 20% of the professors who taught me were Jesuits, and not just Jesuits, but real Jesuits.
Yeah. I totally track.
And the requirements we had were such. 4 courses in theology, 3 in philosophy, 2 in English literature or something, and plus a language requirement. Plus the only thing that I benefited from this being the late 60s, early 70s, is that they were softening some of the requirements. And I took art anthropology to fulfill my math and science requirement.
Yeah.
I didn't have to take a real math class, which I knew I would bomb.
Yeah.
But
even in that, Carlos, even that little story that you tell there, that is an institution that has a sense that there is something that you should know. That there is a corpus, right? That look, for us to sort of mint you as a bachelor of arts,
yes,
you need to have this sort of chunk of something that that you can account for, and in my experience, like that is totally gone.
Yeah, well, it tends to be gone unless schools establish special programs or institutes for such a thing.
Sure.
As is happening at the University of Florida.
Yeah.
With the Hamilton Center. It's happening too, I found out, at the University of North Carolina.
Interesting.
They're establishing, I forget, it's got a funny name that I can't remember at the moment. That's not an obvious great books program, but it is.
Well, they probably don't want to make it too obvious, so it doesn't get too much.
So it's covered.
flack.
It's camouflaged under some other title. But the softening of the significance. Let me put it differently: the erosion of the significance of the Western intellectual tradition and artistic tradition was already in place in the late 60s.
That's right. Yeah.
And actually, I had this experience. Plus, if we're going to talk about Catholic, I went to a Catholic university for my BA, and we had to take 4 theology courses. Some of the theology courses were rather soft, such as Christian marriage.
Sure.
But I took a wonderful course in medical ethics, and I have to say that, I got some real early Christian fathers to read, and I a Christology course that was just the highest conceivable level. But then 10 years later, 1979,
right,
I was applying for my first full-time job. It was like the 45th job I had applied for at St. John's University in Minnesota.
Yeah. Oh, I know it. Yeah.
And the good Benedictines, they hired me.
You were at St. John's?
Yeah, I taught at St.
I didn't know that. Oh, that's so interesting. That's the
Yeah,
church.
not only
that's
that,
the place of the big Star Trek church.
They crafted a very Benedictine job. And actually, this is the way the job was advertised. Basically, we need someone to teach Reformation history, specializing in Protestantism, who can also serve as bibliographer for the School of Theology.
That's funny.
So that was my job.
Yeah.
But I noticed that there was no course on the curriculum at the School of Theology, which was training Catholic clergy. They're Catholic seminarians. And they had no survey of Christian history or of the history of Christian theology. None.
That's wild. This is 79?
79. So I went to the dean. And he was a Benedictine. And I said, look, I'd love to teach a survey course in the history of Christianity or the history of theology, something like that. I think our students really need that. His response was, no. We're only interested in what's happening now with the church.
Right. But God, that's such a good story, though, right, Carlos? I mean, that is in a nut precisely the kind of let's cut ourselves off from the inheritance. Let's it's a weird, in this instance, a sort of a weird Catholic version of year zeroism.
Yes. Yeah.
It's remarkable. It's remarkable.
The church of what's happening now.
Yeah.
So here's where my Jesuit education came in very handy, because those Jesuits had taught me by example how to be sneaky.
Jesuitical.
I went in next semester and I said, I've got another idea. I want to teach a course on the history of heresy. Wonderful.
Great.
That's great. Yes. So I got to teach the subject backwards.
I was just saying, but that's kind of a brilliant way to actually teach the subject.
Yeah.
Because there's a way of looking at church history as the history of heresy, right? That's great. I love it. I love it.
To me, that encapsulates the shift that had taken place in Catholic higher education since Vatican II.
Yeah.
And it infected all Catholic schools, I think, with very few exceptions. And to this day, it remains pretty much that way.
Yeah.
I think most courses, actually, Michael, you taught the Catholic intellectual tradition course at Sacred Heart, right?
Yes, I have. Yes.
But basically, there was no standard syllabus. You could make up your own syllabus, and
there were a couple like, you couldn't take too much out. There were a couple points you had to hit. You had to make sure you worked in. You had to do some selections from Genesis. You had to do the Ten Commandments. You had to do the Gospel of Matthew. You had to do Augustine's Confessions, at least part one. You had to do excerpts from Dante, and a very small excerpt from Aquinas. as long as you had that in there, the rest of it was up to you to sort of take and add things as you pleased, as long as it was approved by the department. But you did have some flexibility there.
Well, I think
I loved what I came up with. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's actually more rigorous than I had imagined when it was explained to me.
Well, hold on there. The guidance for how you're supposed to teach those things is a little different.
You tell. I want to know.
Well, I would say, all right. So there was a sort of training session, discussion sort of a thing for a few hours that went, and there were a few mixed spirits here. One of them, which I really grabbed onto and was really excited about, was, it was put like this. This is not a history course. This is not a theology course. This is not a disciplinary course. In essence, what sort of a question that was cooking in my head for both of you, and I can pose this in a second, but don't be derivative, right? This is not a course where you teach only about the text at a distance, bring it into the lives of the students. But there was also this, this is their seminar. So, you don't set things up too strictly for them. You just kind of, you get them started, but then you kind of let them go wherever they're going to go. But also there are 5 fundamental claims about the Catholic intellectual tradition that they all must prove are true by the end of the course. And one of them was like, God exists in relationship to, or God exists in relationship to man and is manifest through reality and nature. Or one of them is like, God presents himself to man in a triune form. It's like, I'm sorry, wait, I'm just supposed to let them derive the Trinity from only reading the first 3 chapters of Genesis, the 10 Commandments and the Gospel of Matthew?
No John, no Gospel of John, no Trinity, forget it.
Yeah, right, of course, right. I mean, interesting that it wasn't John.
Good Lord. Yeah, well, it begins early. My 3 kids went to public school because I couldn't afford Catholic school. So they went to CCD classes, Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, taught by my wife.
Right.
Oh, well.
Here at home.
Yeah.
And I got to see the books. And one day I lost my cool because the lesson for that week was the Sermon on the Mount. And the takeaway point from the Sermon on the Mount was that Jesus wants everyone to be happy.
Wow.
Oh no.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is really good because I would say, look, for as loose as the approach to this particular Catholic intellectual tradition course was at Sacred Heart, I did actually appreciate the at least the freedom of the structure. I mean, the being able with who I was able to talk with, right? I was able to say, well, what if I have these kind of structured reading guides and I kind of have a central question that I want them to think about beforehand. And then, I let them, right? I don't tell them answers, but, we have a kind of framework there. And they're like, well, okay, you can do that. That's all right. Right. And so that worked out really well. But what was very interesting to me was how many of them coming from Catholic backgrounds had been through CCD and were dead inside at the beginning of the course, specifically because they were expecting this to be college year-long version of CCD, like, right. I don't know, on steroids or something. Right. And they dreaded this and they're like, whatever, I got to go through this. Only to really like, I guess, the way that hey, let's talk about this in the context of your life, right? And this sort of relates back to what you were saying, Kale. It seems as though there's been this erosion of the wisdom, right? And you even said this idea of manliness, right? The sort of root of virtue or virtue. C.S. Lewis says something similar to this in The Abolition of Man, right? Right at the beginning, he says something like, these two Latin guys with the green book, he gives them these fake names, right?
Gaius and Titius.
That's it, Gaius and Titius. Right, that their philosophy is to essentially do that, right? Is what to remove the chest from the man, remove the organ that gives him the impetus to do the things that he ought to do, something like that.
To geld the animal and bid him be fruitful.
Oh, wow.
Yes, exactly.
That is to me that is Lewis was an absolute prophet, especially in Abolition of Man. I think it's one of those books that's very well known in certain sort of Catholic and Christian subcultures, but in terms of like the mainstream, like nobody knows it, and it's so important because he absolutely foresaw everything that we're experiencing in the classroom right now. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And our students, I think, are a product of that chestless, thumosless, formation, and it's weird because, like, on the one hand, they can sense it, but they don't have the power to articulate exactly what they're going through. And so I sense a real deep frustration amongst the students. And so what I see them do is that then they'll abandon the search for meaning as ultimately meaningless, right? Because they've been given nothing. And so then they resort to a kind of, they will just become kind of instrumental nihilists, right? That they will then just sort of pursue whatever dominance hierarchy they seek, right? So they've given up a pursuit of wisdom, or meaning. And to me, that's the tragedy, Now, look, I'm a believer, in all senses of that word. I think that meaning trumps non-meaning, and I think that in my experience, when you give the students something real, they respond. They might fight you, for sure, and that's fine. I mean, I'm a big boy; I can handle the pushback. But they even when they get mad, their anger is a tell that something real is happening. Right, rather than the sort of the whatever, which is how they attach most things, like, or Carlos's CCD thing, like God just wants you to be happy. I mean, like, is there anything more banal and trite than that? And yet, there it is.
Well, my suggestion for that lesson that I gave to Jane was, I know I have an idea to do some arts and crafts. Why don't you have them all paste happy faces on a cross?
That'd be like some like cool avant-garde art movement. Or something,
but oh god, yeah. The thing is, I think that the search for meaning is still very important to the young people we teach. Extremely important, and I think we're doing them a disservice if we don't point them in the direction of the search.
That's right.
That they should be carrying out for meaning. Had something very peculiar happen when I started teaching my Catholic intellectual tradition course. This was 13 years ago. I noticed I was having a little bit of trouble extracting responses from students in discussion. And there was one student who was really on all the time. She was on 100%. And she talked, she did a wonderful job of getting to the important points. So midway through the semester, I asked her after class, as everybody was leaving, I said, can I ask you a question, please? And it's kind of a personal nature. So I asked, have you noticed how reticent your fellow students are to engage in conversation? She said, yeah. And I asked, why do you think that's so? Because that's not typical of Yale students.
Yeah, they're all like, ooh, pick me.
She didn't, without skipping a beat, she said, because they've never had to talk about God in a class.
Hmm.
They're uncomfortable with talking about a subject that has never, ever come up in their education. And actually, many of them, I never know the exact percentage, many of them were Catholic, cradle Catholics.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had never had to talk about God. So it was scary for them. And it's still pretty much so, although now I'm more upfront about that. In the first lecture, I say, this is what the class is about. It's about important subjects that matter to every human being. It's not just about some church,
So is that the answer? I mean, is the answer to the humanities? I mean, if what has led us into this detached kind of derivative space, a kind of semi-religion or religious impulse, an anti-religious impulse, maybe in another sense, is that, is the answer to that then to build God into, or at least to talk about God, right? Not saying like, hey, we've got to get back on some kind of, there's got to be a strict doctrine that's got to be taught, no. But is the answer to this to say like, hey, let's talk about questions of God. Let's get you to talk about God. Is that the way to?
I think that helps. That's one avenue that could prove fruitful. And I can't remember which 20th century Protestant theologian, it might have been Paul Tillich, described the Christian faith as the ultimate search for meaning. And that applies to all religion. The ultimate search for meaning. I mean, why are you here?
Right. And I, Carlos, you mentioned you said something like that resonates with me. Like I have become much less subtle in very real ways in terms of the way that I approach my classroom. But I explicitly foreground, the big questions, who am I? Where did I come from? Therefore, is there a God? What am I supposed to do with the 80 or so years that I've been probably given? Right. And so I sort of do a play like, all right, good news, folks, right, is that you have these questions, right? And you kind of go around the room and you look at them like you have these questions like, who am I? Is there a God? What am I supposed to do with this life? Right. And they're all kind of like, yeah, okay. And it's like, all right, well, good news is that there are, believe it or not, there are people who have lived on this planet spanning back thousands of years who've attempted to answer the same questions that you have, right? And the great news is that they've left an account of their thinking about these things. And we don't have to accept any of these accounts, but you get this opportunity to follow their questions. Like, well, how did Jim answer that question? How did Jill, wrestle with this particular thing, right? And so you can kind of play. So then the order of the day is like, so first, let's try to figure out what Jim or Jill did with these questions, right? First things first, what do they think they mean by these questions? And then how does that resonate with you? Don't and then you sort of say in this kind of like, don't you have the same questions too? And they're like, yeah, I guess I do, and so therefore it kind of just gives permission from the get-go that, look, this is just what we're doing. Yeah, we'll have tests, we'll have quizzes, we'll have papers, and we're going to do all that sort of stuff so you can get credit. But who cares about that stuff, if we don't sort of take care of these ultimate personal questions first, And so I'm just way less subtle than I used to be.
Oh, good. Especially, the students are younger.
Yeah.
The ones by the time they get to college, they've already kind of, I could be wrong, but I think most of them have already pretty much settled on what the meaning of their existence is.
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
No, I think you're right, Carlos. I think you're right. But I also think that they settle to a default, a kind of whatever, you sort of a you do you. It's a kind of bourgeois nihilism, right? I mean, and none of them really want it, though. That's what's always so interesting to me, that even those who will just say, well, there's really no answer to these questions, so who cares, right? None of them really believe that.
Yeah, I had a student here once in a freshman's seminar who, at the very first class, announced to everyone in the room that he was an atheist.
Yeah.
And that he was, I know what it is. It was a seminar, freshman seminar on essential heresies, where again I kind of taught backwards.
That's great. I love it
for freshmen. And I asked everyone a question to write the answer and pass it on to me. What do you think is the most dangerous idea that we live with nowadays? What's the most dangerous idea? A huge number of them wrote versions of the idea that everyone must believe the same thing. Or people who argue that everyone should believe the same thing. So this is why this student very proudly proclaimed himself an atheist. But by the time he was done with his 4 years of college, he was no longer an atheist. And actually very interested in, although he's not Christian, but very, very focused on Christian thought. It's very interesting to see the evolution.
Yeah.
But yeah, that question really that I asked, the answers really scared me so much I never taught the course again.
What do you make of their answer, Carlos? I'm just curious. That seems to be a shared meme at the very least, yes. Right? That they all were worried about a kind of theocratic, quasi-fascistic conformity or something, yes. Right?
And also, there really is no truth.
Yeah.
What I believe to be true is true. That's how I interpret it. That's why it scared me so much.
Yeah.
It was this proposition that you can't tell me. You can't tell me what to think. I can understand that, but that was more than this. It was there is no truth.
And I
shared in common by people.
But again, the most common answer, I want to note the irony that the most common answer, no shared answer was that. And I think this is where like someone in the sort of the post-liberal space would be like, right, this is sort of a, credo one or tenet one of the sort of the faith of liberalism, right?
Yes.
So they are actually all very highly catechized in a strange sort of way.
Yeah. Yes, in a very, very strange way.
Yeah.
So we're now at the point. It took me a long time to figure out why disability studies was becoming a very popular area in theology, in particular.
Theology.
Disability studies finally dawned on me a few weeks ago when I was reading an article about the Canadian health system is now providing amputations to people who think of themselves as disabled, even though they have perfect bodies.
Yes.
So you want to be a cripple? Sure, we'll cut off some of your limbs. Or you want to be blind? We'll blind you.
So what are the incentive structures that you see there, Carlos? It's really interesting because we were talking earlier about religio, right? This is before we started recording, but we were talking about this notion of the religious, or we're really talking about those that are sort of super all in, right? So that are religious in the medieval context were those who would profess a vow of some sort, right, to a way of being, a way of life.
Right.
that spirit hasn't gone away. It seems to have migrated into some sort of weird.
Whatever I think I am, that's what I am, and you've got to. Everybody else has got to accept. So something that until fairly recently would have been described in a psychiatric textbook as some kind of pathology, is now not only all right, but it's the norm.
Yeah.
And if you speak out against that, then you're the heretic.
Right.
And you have to wear the H for heretic on your chest forever. And it's whatever I think I am. So, and ironically, I have never read any article, much less a book, on disability studies. But this piece of news from Canada helped me figure out why Christian theologians, or theologians to be, would want to focus on disabilities as a subject, in the same way that you focus on gender or class or race. It's an important subject, disability.
Well, it's an alternate status hierarchy, isn't it? Right. That if to be religious in the medieval context was to sort of level up hierarchy wise in terms of being serious and seen as serious, right? It would only make sense that there's a sort of a move into this sort of what you and I would consider sort of weird, right? But you can kind of understand it. If you understand the incentives, you can understand why you would have perfectly bodily, healthy people elect to do this kind of thing as a kind of marker of sanctity for an alternative hierarchy of value.
Yes, and in a reversal of hierarchies. It's the disabled, it's the person with the wrong skin color, whatever. They count more than everyone else.
This is there's a clinical psychological researcher by the name of J.D. Haltigan, who I think he's down in Florida, writes about something called the pathocracy. I think it's just this exact thing, right? Yeah. So there's it's especially taken hold of the mental health profession, insofar as he writes in this idea that's like, well, it's not like you don't go to therapy to like remove or overcome or be able to deal with your pathology.
Right.
It's like you come to worship it. You go so that the therapist will acknowledge your pathos, your pain, whatever your ailment is, give it a name so that you can justify any number of actions because of it, right? Whether they be actions of social distinction or to have an out in a social setting where you just maybe feel like acting like a bad person. I'm sorry, right? I have this condition. It's allowed to me. Something like that.
Right. And the great thing that we can do as allies, right, is to affirm that. Right. So this move to therapeutic, the move to therapeutic affirmation is an act of worship. Again, this is total inversion. But it's an act of worship, which is why you can never ask the therapist the question that like I would think like my dad would ask is like, well, is it working? You've been going to this thing for however many, like, how's that working out for you? Right? You can't ask that question, right? Because it's not about health; it is about affirmation, right? And there's that therapeutic turn is. I don't know how you get out of that particular ratchet. To be honest with you,
I am baffled constantly when I run into these things that have been going on for a number of years, but I just really haven't gotten the meaning of it. Like this disability studies thing, that so much can happen around our field of vision that we don't pay attention to. And then all of a sudden you come to a point where it's already too late. It's already taken over.
Yeah.
Well, I notice in particular with a lot of where these places have taken hold, right? It seems that if there is something that unifies them, it's like this, I don't know, it's like a, the only correct response is yes. You must affirm, you must agree, you must go forward. Really, the problem is that there's the obstacle to be overcome is that you're not allowing things to progress. Go forward, say yes, agree. And anybody that says no, or maybe let's slow down, or are you sure, or should we course correct, or are we veering off, right? Something like that is, oh, wait, no, you're part of the problem. And I noticed, right, something like mental health, people who work in education tend to be people with more agreeable personalities. Why? Because you should be interested in dealing with people, right? You're interesting, that personality trait is associated with nurturing, with compassion, right? And we even see this in say attempts to redefine intelligence in terms of emotional intelligence, which is something just like being agreeable. When people present an emotion, do you just agree with it? Like, yes, you feel this way.
Well,
how emotionally intelligent of you. So it seems to me like there is, I mean, not to overly bring in McGilchrist here, but Kale, I know you and I have talked a bit about this in the past, right? There is this, what seems to be in common between this agree, go forward, affirm, together with this propensity for being overly caught up in derivatives. Right. I mean, well, this is also underpins the 2008 financial crash that we've mentioned several times. This was a derivatives issue. The derivatives market became so bloated relative to the actual stuff that was
the thing
there.
itself. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, hey, we're in another situation right now. I mean, this GameStop thing that happened a few years ago was entirely because of this. Right. The stock was shorted. There, more shares than existed were sold before people bought them. And the price moved too much, and then everybody was like, "Oh no! Literally, all the banks will collapse because this game store, we sold too many shares without the ability to buy them back. Oh no!" But this propensity to over abstract and to become derivative. Okay, let's get away from wisdom, right? Let's not talk about ways of life. Let's talk about, the implicit structure of the way that we talk about ways of life, but not how to live itself. These two things together seem to align with this kind of left hemisphere thing that McGilchrist talks about. But, whether it's a hemispheric thing, it's this, there seems to be some sort of natural phenomenon which connects these different elements together.
Yeah, and when something that's very real, it's described as a discourse, or identified as a discourse or a narrative rather than a real thing. That's another huge issue. I just finished rereading this book by Michel de Certeau, Possession of Loudon. Loudon. Very interesting. It says he's a Jesuit. He was a Jesuit. He's dead. But he treats possession in this entire book as a discourse. It's very French. It's a discourse. These dozen or so nuns who all were simultaneously possessed by the devil, and it took years to exorcise. This is all a discourse.
How for the layman, how is he using this idea of a discourse, possession as a discourse?
In that there are expectations of how things should unfold and roles for people to play.
I was just going to say, it sounds to me like a show. But
anyway,
it's a
show. It is all a show. And then when talking about the mountains of literature that were written about this case, it's just astounding how many titles there are. They're all different versions, different discourses. So there's the Protestant discourse, there's the Catholic discourse, and of course the possession itself was very Catholic discourse. But then the Protestants had a different discourse, and the politiques, who just wanted to do away with religion, they had a different discourse. And the nuns themselves were caught up in this discourse, and I just lost patience completely.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Carlos, but this is from, or this is popularized, certainly, this idea among the constructivists. I don't know, social constructivists, or post-structuralists, something like that. This is popularized by Foucault in the English title is what is it? The French title is Les mots et les choses, words and things. Yeah. But the order of things is how the English title is. But he particularly references this early modern phrase in his title, in the French title, Les mots et les choses, the difference between words and things. But his conclusion is that the thing in itself, right, is, really we all, because we all live here, this is all that matters. And we can, right, what needs to be talked about is the discourse, because this out here in the natural world, right, it's unreachable, it's unknowable, it's unattainable. So the only thing we can know is the rhetorical sphere of, les mots, discourse, narrative. So we should just completely focus on that, right? It's an endorsement of that very derivative thing that is sapping us of our meaning, it seems.
Yes. So again, for the layman here, it sounds to me like it's a classic distinction between map and territory. And it's basically saying that the territory is irrelevant, and let's just play with maps.
The map, That's great. That's great. Yes. I never heard that analogy before. Yep. It's wonderful. Yep.
And that was graduate school for me. It's like, let's play with maps. Let's play with maps. And let's just pretend that reality doesn't exist. It's like sort of this like hyper Kantian nightmare. It's like, I don't know.
The Ding an sich will come in the night and strangle you.
Yeah, it's funny.
Unless you realize that there is no ding at all. It's, good Lord. Well, listen,
very good. Well, gentlemen,
my daughter has been texting me. I think I need to
ping, 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 ping.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this discussion. Sort of as a wrap up here, hey, to this question, what can we do, right? I mean, maybe it's get out there on whatever kind of small scale possible, and maybe just start asking these questions, making little decisions with our lives, something like that, to not get too trapped up in the closed world of symbols, or this derivative place, or get caught up in the map games that are completely ignorant of the territory.
And it's a fight worth fighting.
Yeah.
It's not always easy, but what I've discovered since I've been teaching now since, if I count my TA years, 1974, 50 years. What I've discovered is that you very, very seldom see yourself as instrumental in changing anybody's thinking or making an impact on them. The students don't tell you this. You changed the way I thought about this. It's very rare. But I've been at it long enough that I have gotten missives, either letters or emails, from students I had long ago, and many of them, their names I can't remember, who say, it's taken me a long time to say this, but, you helped me immensely. You had an impact on my thinking, and so on and so forth.
I think you're right, Carlos. To me, that rare is the time in which I always tell my kid, friends, when they ask about my job, it's like, look, I like cutting the grass, because when I cut the grass, I can see the lines, and I can see within the span of an hour and a half that it looks clean and good, like I did something. Yeah. But in my day-to-day life, at best, I'm at best, I'm in the long game. And we have to be epic kind of in our orientation, that anything I do tomorrow in the classroom might yield some fruit in a couple of decades.
Yes, and sometimes we do it cluelessly.
Yeah.
I'll end with this anecdote. One of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me is one of the students in my Catholic intellectual tradition course was considering converting to Catholicism from some evangelical Reformed church where predestination was up front and center.
Mm-hmm.
One day after the discussion section, he asked me to stay behind. He wanted to talk to me about predestination. And he was a math major. So he had turned Calvinist predestination into a mathematical formula.
Sure.
Which he wrote on the board. He says, this is what I'm having trouble with right here. So I started suggesting, without actually knowing what I was doing, what if we change this factor over here and, cross them over? I did that 3 or 4 times. And in the 5th effort, he fell to his knees. Said, thank you. I am no longer troubled by predestination. I have no idea mathematically how that made sense to him. What he could not understand, as I was trying to explain to him verbally, that the Catholic position on predestination is that it's a paradox. Yes, you have free will. And yes,
God knows.
God is omniscient.
Yeah, that's right.
And there is predestination and free will simultaneously, but he had to turn it into a mathematical formula. And by just guessing, I got the right formula.
Yeah, that's great.
So even in our cluelessness, we sometimes help people.
Yeah, it's certainly encouraging, to talk to both of you on these points. As somebody just at the beginning of a teaching career myself, right? It's I have to say, it's for my few short years in the classroom, I can say that there's definitely nothing more fulfilling than you have that good class where it just clicks, right? You just know it inside you. You're like, but they didn't say they're not going to come out and be direct about it, but I know something's going to cook after this one.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
so thank you very much again.
Oh, it's wonderful speaking with both of you
for this conversation. Wonderful to talk to you both all together. Look forward to the next opportunity to do so. Thank you as well, everyone watching and listening. We'll see you next time on 21st Century Renaissance. Take care now.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.